I'm Sheila Bravo with Dana, the Delaware Alliance for Nonprofit Advancement. Thank you for joining us today. We're really looking forward to this exciting conversation around understanding strategies and actions for creating a racially inclusive and engaged board. I'm thrilled today to have our panel moderator, Claudia Pena-Peretti. And Claudia is the Chief Executive Officer of the Girl Scouts of the Chesapeake Bay. She's a strong advocate for children and has served on the board of many nonprofits, including Dana, as well as Primeros Pasos, and has been one of Delaware Today's Women in Business and a recipient of Girls Inc.'s Delaware Strong, Smart, and Bold Award. Claudia is currently a trustee of the University of Delaware and serves on the board of Woodlawn Trustee. Our two panelists today are Cynthia Primo Martin, and she's a retired nonprofit executive specializing in agency management, fund development, and marketing. And she served as the director and trustee of numerous nonprofit organizations, including the University of Delaware, the International Reading Association, the Delaware Community Foundation. Wow, this is a long list here, Cynthia.
Read all that, please.
And she certainly has been the founder of Nonprofit Trustees of Color and brings tremendous experience and perspective that she's going to share with us today. Alice Sawyer also is on our panel, and she has a distinguished 30-year career in the YMCA, and she also has serves as a coach. She's a champion for people, from the board of directors to the frontline employees. And she is a popular speaker and presenter at local and national conferences. Alice also has served on many boards, including the Trustees of Color. And so she brings this national perspective, but also real life perspective here in Delaware and other parts of the country to the conversation. Want to thank you again for your participation. For those who've just joined recently, please enter your name and your organization affiliation so we know who you are. For full disclosure, we are recording this session so that others who were not able to attend today are able to participate. And I do want to give a very special thank you to JP Morgan Chase. JP Morgan Chase has truly been a champion of diversity, equity, inclusion, capacity building, and has supported Dana in these efforts over the past couple of years. And thanks to their generous support, we're able to bring you this webinar at no charge. So if you know someone at JP Morgan Chase, please extend your thank you. We absolutely encourage questions. Claudia will lead the conversation. I'll be monitoring the chat box. If there are questions come up that I think would be really good to interject at the time, as I mentioned, I'll gently bring up the topic. Otherwise, we're going to allow Cynthia and Alice to share some of their perspectives, and then we are leaving some room at the end, some good amount of time for questions and for some really good dialogue. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Claudia Pena-Peretti.
Thank you so much, Sheila. Hi, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here with you virtually and very excited to talk about nonprofit leadership and diversity and inclusion, topics that I'm very passionate about as well. So let's get started. As the decision-making body at the highest level of the organization's leadership, boards play a critical role in creating an organization that prioritizes, supports, and invests in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So building a diverse and inclusive board is critically important. And we know this, right? Whether the board is hiring the chief executive officer, determining the strategic plan, allocating resources, or establishing many goals to serve the community, the board's leadership on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion is essential. Therefore, boards must be committed to cultivating a welcoming and truly inclusive board culture, a culture in which every board member's perspective is truly welcomed, valued, and respected. And that's the only way to effectively diversify the board. So let's begin with Cynthia. Cynthia, your passion and commitment to identifying, cultivating, and recruiting leaders of color for board service span decades. And I found a quote from you last night when you were honored with the Fund for Women's First Founder Award. And this quote goes back 4 years, approximately October 2016. And you said, with the challenges we face in our communities, we need the best minds at the table finding solutions. To achieve this end, it means that one has to expand his or her networks. It means making an effort to seek out and recognize other points of view. It means learning about others who are different and inviting them into your world. Wow, that's amazing, Cynthia, 4 years ago. So although this is a timely issue, board diversity, it's not a new one. And boards have been challenged for many years to diversify and transform the way they think about leaders, and especially leaders of color. So it seems that one critical component of board diversity is the readiness of the board. So my question to you, Cynthia, is can you talk about how do you know your board is ready to diversify? And if they're not, how do they get ready?
Thank you very much, Claudia, and thank you, Dana, for hosting this very important webinar today. I want to mention at the very onset that I'm working on a handbook for nonprofit leaders, and it will be talking about recruiting and training and engaging people of color. And Alice has been my spiritual guide through all of this.
Nag.
A lot of help from a lot of friends. So much of what we say and advice we give today will be in keeping with this book that we hope, handbook, will be out before the first of the year. And so you'll be able to hear more about our feelings and how this all happens. What we've discovered in our experience is that to know you're ready to diversify, you need to utilize some of the board readiness checklists that are available. And some of those self-assessment tools, and you identify your board's strengths and the areas need an improvement. And there's certainly a lot of diversity and inclusion assessment tools as well. If you've heard of Project Implicit Bias, that's one of them. And so you can really look at who you are and then start from there and realize where your gaps are, where you need to go from there. But I think most important too is you got to have a diversity and inclusion policy statement, and you have to have an action plan with specific goals, with steps, timelines, measurement tools, accountability, all of that. And it's everyone on the board who needs to be involved in it. Somebody asked me the other day that, well, wonder if 9 of the 12 board members wants to be engaged in a diverse and inclusive board and not the other 3. Well, I think you got to look at that. If they're not interested in being included, they may want to move away from this or find some other way in your organization. Your whole board has to be committed to doing that, each person. And I think developing a year-round board development committee is something that I want Alice to speak. If it's okay, can I turn it to Alice?
Oh, no, finish up.
Yeah, no, I want you to talk about a board development committee because that's your thing, and I believe in it wholeheartedly.
Well, if it's all right with Claudia, I would say that it's very important to have a year-round board development committee, not just a nominating committee that gathers, a month before the new board members are voted on. And it demonstrates a real commitment year-round, not only to recruiting, but training and orienting and making sure the board is ready. All of that would be the role of the year-round board development committee. And there would be a diversity champion on that, hopefully a staff diversity champion, as well as the board diversity champion. And you may have other folks that aren't on the board on your board development committee, but you need to have people who are passionate and really understand the breadth and the importance of this effort for the board. And so I do feel passionately about that. And I've seen it work in YMCA's where I have probably had the most experience over my career. But boards that had a year-round diversity committee that were really committed to this work.
It looks like
Oh.
Alice is frozen there.
Oh, okay,
Claudia, you are muted.
okay. And you're muted.
Okay, so
Did we answer the
Let's-
question?
yes, yes.
I'm sure we answered the
And,
question.
and let's keep going.
Okay.
So, and my next question was for Alice, but Cynthia,
We'll go back and forth.
yes, we'll go back and forth. So, how do we recruit people of color by design and not by accident? I know that you and Alice have talked about this, and of course, Alice has worked over the many years with so many people from all walks of life. So can you share what is meant by recruiting people of color by design and not by accident?
It's all about the plan, and it's all about being intentional in your recruitment and being willing to put in the time that you need to identify and cultivate people. It is not always an easy task, but if you have planned for it and you involve enough people in your network that can help you identify and ask people who might not have been asked to serve on a board, that's so important. And I think what we say too is, you know, you need to develop a detailed description of your board needs and what the skills and experiences you need to fill your board gaps. And look to your new trustee of color or your additional trustee to help fill those gaps. We're not looking for tokenism. We're looking for people who will come to the board and can add value, and they will bring also other perspectives. That's what's so important. And I can't say enough about networks. In the book, when it comes out, we're going to give you a number of sources to look at, but it's really almost every board member's responsibility and to do this. And whether you're white or a person of color, you expand your networks. And I think, and sometimes it's radical, that every board member should be able to come up with 1 or 2 candidates per year. Which means if you don't have them in your network, you're going to have to go and get them. You're going to have to expand your networks. And we laugh about sometimes even, I go and talk to people wherever I am. So you may have to actually go outside the 9 dots and talk to someone and introduce yourself and say hello and meet some new people.
And Alice, you're back. So, yeah.
I don't know what you heard of me before I disappeared, but we lost the internet in that office, so I'm now in Sheila's office.
No worries, no worries. We were just talking about, and maybe you can share, how do we recruit by design, people of color by design and not by accident, and what
Well,
that means.
Yes, well, it means that it actually is part of the planning of the board. It's not just sort of a knee-jerk thing. Oh, we need someone of color on the board. Let's go find somebody. You know, again, it's a year-round effort. Every member of that board should be a talent scout looking for people that could serve on the board and then refer them to that year-round board development committee. And it has to be at that level of commitment where, you know, there's a tremendous planning. And we also talked about, I'm not sure if it's here, but we talked about what we call the linked interest and ability of qualifying that potential board member. And what that means is that we would spend time building a relationship with this potential new board member and find out if they are linked in some way to your organization. For us, it was easy in the why because we knew they were members already. And that's how we found some of our board members. And there was that linkage. an interest in our organization because they were in our buildings and in our programs. It's harder for other organizations, but if you are a membership organization where you have clients and things like that, that's an excellent place to look. So you look for link, interest, and the ability to add value to the board based on the needs of the board, and not just the need for a person of color, but what they could contribute both financially, but the value they could add to your board. So again, link, interest, and ability. I remember when I was working here in Delaware that we had a president of the DuPont company who was a member of the Y and had not been identified. He was fairly new to Delaware, had not been identified, and we went and talked to him, and he ended up being on our board, chair of the board, and as well as helping us with the capital campaign. So you don't know what treasure you have in your organization already that can add value to the board. It is the exact same principles with looking for people of color to serve on your board. And I don't know, Cynthia, since I was missing in action here, did you mention that the rule of more than one? Did you mention that?
No, I didn't, but I can do that. And I see questions are popping up in there on the screen about getting your board trained as well, and cultural competence and all those important issues. So I don't know if you want to deal with that now, Claudia, or you want to.
We can take the questions at the end,
Okay.
and because maybe some of our questions might answer some of theirs. But that's great. I see them popping up as well.
Okay.
And so, and we'll just have a discussion with it, right? So the next piece is, what about, can you talk a little bit about effective interviewing and choosing the right candidate? And just, I know from experience that when we talk about the link, ability, and interest, sometimes we recycle people, right? And it's always the same individuals, the same people of color, and also share what is meant by people of color. I think that's a broad statement, and maybe people want to know what is meant by people of color, but also when we're looking in those networks, those important networks, it's sometimes hard to be comfortable, to branch out. So the plan is great, and I hear that. And if we could just talk about really choosing the right candidate, that would be great for the both of you. Thank you.
Yeah, Alice, you want to start? I'll start.
You start, yeah.
Okay, well, we're back to that probing for the link, interest, ability. I think that's going to be the message throughout all of this. And one of the things I'll mention too is involving others in that process. You have your board diversity champions, and you want to involve lots of people with different perspectives in your process of interviewing and being part of the choice of a candidate. And I think what we have to look at is, and we, the non-traditional types of people, I think we get stuck with, and that's, okay, I'm going off right now. That's why I got trustees of color, because there were 6 to 10 people, including my husband and later me, after I married him, that were being asked to serve on the same boards. And we had a look, and we had a way about us. And I think that was acceptable for people who are used to an image of a person of color. And when I talk about persons of color, I usually talk about Black and brown people, indigenous people, so on, but primarily Black and brown in this circumstance. And I think everyone had to look like that, us. And I think what we have to realize is that not everybody's going to fit that model. And there may be people with more or less experience. They may not have a law degree. They may not have a PhD, but there are young people, and there are people in your volunteer segment, and all of that, who are going to be people that you can look to. And you interview them, and then you also look at your gut. How do you feel about that particular person? So I think that you need to follow all the rules of interviewing, but make sure you have enough people that are involved in this who can give their perspectives as well. Yeah.
Okay, great, great. And so now, once we have the board member chosen, what steps, important steps, do we take to orient and onboard the new board member to ensure retention, right? And that the new board member is acclimated, fully participating, and has a positive experience. What are some of the steps to both of you?
Alice,
Sure, well,
we have
I
lots more
could-
tips, but maybe we'll get to them in the questions. We have all these tips, but go ahead, Alice.
That's okay. No, I was just going to say it begins before they attend their first board meeting, for sure. And you want to, make them feel incredibly welcome. And that includes maybe meeting with them ahead of time before the board meeting and making sure they get an orientation to the board before the first board meeting. And it's about building a positive relationship that will lead to a positive experience for them on the board. So that the first steps happen before they ever hit your boardroom. I have seen examples where YMCA's had written letters. Some of the board members had written letters, emails today, of course, to board members and just welcoming them. And several of the board taking them out to lunch so they know somebody that first day when they go to their first board meeting. All of that are the first steps. And Cynthia, of course, there's training and orientation. So I'm going to hit it back to you, Cynthia.
Okay, I think you want to involve your new trustee in committee work or planning of event at the very beginning. You need to get people engaged as soon as possible. Otherwise, they stand on the outside and they're engaged. I want to tell you, this is a true story, so I'm going to tell you this about, and people have been sending me, thank you, keep those stories coming about their successes and board diversity, and also people of color, their experiences and being on this board. And one real sad, but a good example of it was one person told me that a woman of color had joined a board and came to the meeting, and there was a table with all the chairs around there and then all the board members sitting there, and she came in and looked for a seat and there weren't any. So she said, okay, let me go to the next room and find a seat. So she did, and she brought it back into the boardroom and nobody said anything. So she sat behind the board. 2 minutes later, 2 white people came in and everybody seemed to know who they were. The chair of the board stopped and said, oh, why don't you go and get 2 chairs or a couple chairs out in the next room and bring them in and sit with us. And then when they came in with their chairs, a few board members moved apart to let them in to sit there, because maybe they were friends of theirs. I'm not exactly sure. Whatever, she was left out. And it got to the point where her voice wasn't being heard. She wasn't being listened to, and she eventually resigned. And I think what Alice is saying is exactly right. You have to look out for everyone from the very beginning and act like you want people to be there. And that's the way you get them involved, and that's the way you keep them.
And that's what welcome looks like. And certainly that story, on a scale of 1 to 10, how welcome did that person feel?
Yeah.
I'd say 0.
Yeah.
We got to be looking as board members and board chairs, we got to be looking at that, making sure. I often use an analogy that, being a board chair is like being a conductor. And you have to make sure that every voice is being heard. And the interesting thing about music, and I'm not that musical, actually, Cynthia is our musician, but I love harmony. I love when people harmonize. And, if you look at your board as being an opportunity for that kind of harmony, and you can't have harmony if everybody's singing the same note. That's why diversity is so important, is to have those different notes, those different voices. But they must feel free to speak up, not just sit there, but have an avenue to speak up and speak out. And that's where that's where they bring value to the board. But if we don't welcome them, we don't make them feel comfortable, it's not going to happen. eventually they're going to fade away, stop going to board meetings, stop participating. And if we don't do an intervention at that point, we lose them. So,
Right. And with that example you shared, Cynthia, it would be not unusual for that person not to attend the second board meeting, and then the board wonder why that person is not attending, because
you wouldn't go back. I wouldn't go back.
right, it's the unconscious bias, the implicit bias that some people are not aware of, and that's why we're having this discussion today. So I'm going to take a few questions and then get back to ours, because these questions are great. And from Sharmina, keeping cultural competence in mind, what skills should an organization look for when selecting their board members?
Mhm.
Well, we talk about a lot that you really do need to know your board, and we talk about board matrices, and with all, and they're on the internet, and you can use those, and you can put in there the skills that you're looking for, also in terms of getting people of color and people with diverse perspectives. And you need to look at those and decide, okay, this is what I need in this board, and I need to be sure that they also fill any other gaps that we have in our organization as well. So I think, I always talk about these legacy, that's my example, that legacy was always a means of affirmative action. We talk about that people would bring in their brothers and their sisters and their aunts and so on and so forth. And I think we've got to get away from that, and we've got to look and, again, expand the network, and we've got to look at people who may not be part of that legacy, but are people of color who bring those same skills. And if your board needs cultural competency training, then that may be something that you need to get, but you need to be on the same page and be able to look at a person of color, not just as a token, but someone who brings the skills that your board needs to provide oversight. You want to add to that, Alice?
No, I think that's exactly right. And there are tools out there. There's a matrix that you can fill in to look at what the needs of the board are, and you would recruit for those needs, those skills. I'm not sure if we're answering the question exactly, but
She just said it was excellent. So
Yes, and I could just add, I think even for, I am personally Black and brown. I'm half and half, right? So that skill would be the knowledge I bring about my culture.
absolutely.
And whether it's the language, whether it's the food, whether it's the environment, whether it's, I come from a low income family and here I sit, right? So that skill is definitely needed. The skill to be able to be compassionate, to be able to bring to the community, right?
Absolutely.
People, I've always said, you can't be it if you can't see it. And so for someone who is a person of color, that skill could be, okay, yes, the higher degree or the knowledge or the financial or the law or the banking, but it can also be just as simple as I understand the community we serve because I'm part of that community. If you're serving people of color, then, and we all are, right? So we definitely need different perspectives, and that's part of what we're talking about. The skill should be, well, it goes deeper. It's more of a philosophical or behavioral skill than just a technical one, right?
Absolutely.
So I think that's a great question. And the next one is, what about education for the existing board members? And I know we talked about training, but for those boards who say, well, we don't have the time for the training, or we don't know where to look for the training, what can help them to understand what it means to be inclusive and accessible for the newer atypical board members? How to build relationships with new board members. And what does that mean? I think it means just, the same as with any other person. But For you, Alice and Cynthia, with your broad knowledge, what does that mean to members to be inclusive with atypical, in quotes, board members?
Alice, you want to go and I'll come after?
Well, there are many trainings and consultants that come in and work with boards to really, I think if a board doesn't really grasp that once they've had developed a board development committee and they see they have a policy for inclusion and they still don't get it, I think that, the cultural competency type of analysis and a consultant that works with boards on this particular issue would be appropriate. What do you think, Cynthia?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are resources, folks. I mean, we've got universities near us and we've got people who can come in. If you can't always pay for that kind of help, then there may be some volunteers who can help you with your work. But you've got to ask. And that's that network thing again, and get advice that you need and bring in what you need to get those points across. And I see all these questions coming in. You're right. We're talking about life experiences and not just business experience. Absolutely, Susan. And that's why you want broad perspectives, and you need to have people with broad perspectives. And this is off the subject, but I just want to say, I'm so programmed now. Dana's got consultants as well. I am so programmed into diversity these days that I look in the supermarket. I was just saying the other day to see, okay, do they have enough men, women? I look at a restaurant. I look at, wherever I am, or my contractor, and so on. So I think it's all part of programming in your daily life to understand diversity is here. It's who we are. The world is changing. People of color are here, Black and brown people are here, and we need to make sure they're in every part of our existence. And if you're not thinking about that all the time, whether you can hire a consultant or not or whatever, that's where you start. It's got to be part of your DNA.
It's that DNA, yes.
DNA. Okay, and another question, are there some board evaluation tools that help a board to consider their functioning in relationship to welcoming all board members to participate, but particularly with the lens of diverse perspectives and people of color?
I think there are, and I think Dana can help you with that as well, right? Alice, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Dana has the resources to help with that, and it really is, for everyone that joins a board. I mean, I can honestly tell you, as a woman, 30 or 40 years ago, sitting on a board, I was often the only woman there, and I think we've all had an experience where we're somewhere where we don't feel comfortable for one reason or another. And so we are sensitive. We understand that feeling. And I think that, I know there are resources out there to help you with that.
And I think, Cynthia, your book is coming out, right, soon? Is it? And that would be a resource as well?
As well, yeah. Well, we hope to get that book out before the first of the year, to give some other thoughts about how you do this. Can I? Well, I guess I'm talking, so I guess I'll say something else. I'm sorry. I just want to say that I just want to give an example to, I think what we have in the book will be a lot of scenarios of, again, success and times when a board chair or a member could have acted differently. And I want to make sure to get this example in. There was one woman of color, a board member who came to a board meeting. It was right after the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor incidents and all that have happened in our past. And on the agenda, when they came into the meeting, was Black Lives Matter. That's it. That's all there was right there. Black Lives Matter. So this woman trustee, a woman of color, came in and sat down, looked at the agenda. She looked around and she's like the only person of color on the board, which is another whole area when you talk about having more than one on a board, making sure that you have at least 2 or 3 people. And in some cases, we talk about 30%. But the issue was that here she was there with that topic. And everyone was looking to her to I guess, to be the one to say something. And it often puts us on the spot, it really puts us on the spot as people of color. And I think would have been nice if had the CEO told her ahead of time or sent the agenda out ahead of time saying, we really care about this subject, but we want to think about it so we all can come in. So she ended up having to be the person to start the conversation. And it would have been great if others had helped start that conversation. It worked eventually because she did a good job of it. But I'm just saying we have to use our judgment and be commonsensical as well when we address these questions and these issues and how do you retain people and so on and so forth.
Great. And another question is, what are some well-meaning efforts that could be considered obstacles, drawbacks, or disadvantages with board members as they work to diversify their board?
Okay, I'll start, Alice.
That's a good question. I have to think about it.
It's a good question. I think sometimes there's a fear of recruiting, a fear of networking, a fear of identifying that you're looking for people of color. I've had people come to me and say, well, we'll have this conversation. And I'm like, where are they going with this conversation? And they're kind of beating around the bush. And I finally say, oh, are you looking for a person of color to serve on your board? And it's like, you asked the important question. I didn't want to say the word black. I didn't want to say the word brown. I didn't want to say people of color. I'm afraid to say, if you want to be successful, you got to deal with the elephant in the room, and you're going to have to be very clear. Remember, this is one of the qualifications, not the only qualification. You're looking for a person of color because you want different perspectives, so you make the best possible decision. So don't be afraid to say, hey, my organization is looking for people of color, and get your networks, find the networks that you get to get you some prospects. It's okay, folks.
Okay, great. And so now I'm going to ask the last question of both of you, and then I'm going to open it up for Q&A. Oh, wait. Oh, yeah. I almost lost you. Q&A. What are the 2 or 3 best pieces of advice to sum this up? And I know we're all thinking along the lines of board recruitment, but what are the 2 or 3 best pieces of advice that are the most important elements in achieving an inclusive board?
Well, I'll start, since this has sort of been my theme, is that year-round board development committee. And it's just desperately important that you have that presence year-round, and that you are recruiting year-round, and you are identifying, interviewing, and searching, and finding great candidates year-round for the board. That would be my single most important piece of advice. I think that again, there's a lot of common sense in your approach and to this effort. And, it's not a trendy thing. It's just, out building relationships with people, being sensitive to a new board member coming on board. All of these are sort of common sense approaches. And I think in Cynthia's book, it's about that, using your common sense and in this work. So those are my 2 probably most important. I think there is, and I wanted to tell this story, but I do think there is not only is it the right thing to do, especially at this time in our country, in our world, but also there is a business case for it as well. If you need that, and I saw it happen when I was consulting with YMYW actually in Newark, New Jersey, and they were trying to revitalize it. And one of the things I discovered in the process of sitting in on a board meeting was that that Y was centered right in the middle of a community of Portuguese folks. And there was no one on the board representing that community. So when after I met with the executive director, I said, you're sitting here and there was no one that spoke Portuguese working at the front desk. And so they invited 2 or 3 people from the community after I had left with that recommendation. And when I came back 6 months later, it was amazing how many Portuguese folks they had actually in the building, members of the Y. They had printed their brochure in English, and when you turned it upside down, it was in Portuguese. They had Portuguese-speaking folks at the front desk, and that all started with getting some board members that represented that community. So there is a tremendous business case for this as well, as it is the right thing to do.
And I would say, again, developing your networks, your focus groups, and ensuring that your staff is diverse, the vendors you work with, you've got to do this throughout your organization so that the world can see your commitment to diversity and inclusion. And they know that you're really putting your money where your mouth is on this subject. And the image that you portray in the community and how you engage others to help you do this work is a very important thing. And so, as I said, and I think also for me that you're always on. Diversity isn't something you can do from 9 to 3 on next Tuesday. Diversity and inclusion. You can't recruit, you can't engage, you can't do, it's got to be part again of the DNA. You've got to be doing this on an ongoing, and thinking outside the dots and being creative. And I often compare this to saying to people, pretend you're at your job and you have to do a research project. What's your goal and what are all the steps that you have to take to do this project? How are you going to measure your success? And where are you going to be 2 years from now? Reinventing the wheel, or are you going to carry this out? I think once you get a model that works for you, then you continue to use that model to help you be more diverse. And it's not just the moment. It's about keeping this going. You know, just the last thing I would say is about, you know, I feel like we've done a lot of work, and even Trustees of Color had connected 500 people of color to boards in Delaware. And, you know, and you think you've done this, but then you look at the board source statistics, and Dana can provide you with those, and our boards are still predominantly white and male. So we worked all this time, and we still have to find a way to change the picture. And so we have our work cut out for us going forward.
I have a question to ask those who are watching. If someone were a fly on the wall and they were looking at your board today, what would they think of your organization based on the board you have and the diversity and inclusion of that board, as well as your staff? What does it say about your organization's commitment? And what does it say about your mission as an organization? And I think the board is a great place to look to see the commitment in this area. So my question is, how today, if I came visiting, Cynthia and I came in and visited your board meeting, what would we see? What does that say about your organization?
Okay, great.
Can I just say lastly, we have to get off our duffs and do it.
Oh, yeah.
We have to be Nike. We're talking for a long time. Come on, we've got to move.
Right. This has been, as we said, many decades of talking about diversity. So there's some questions. Great. The first one, when a board member resigns before term, should someone reach out to have an exit conference or debrief, and whose responsibility
Absolutely.
should that be? Right, depending on the circumstances of the resignation, the resignee may be reluctant to be candid with the ED or chair. So should there be an exit interview, and whose responsibility should that be?
Alice, you want to go, or you
I
want
was just going to say, absolutely, we need an exit interview, and we should be watching the participation of that board member prior. Are they attending meetings? Are they on a committee? How involved are they? Do they speak up at board meetings? We should be seeing that ahead of time as sort of a flag. Ooh, this isn't working out. But if a board member resigns and it's before their term, it's over, et cetera, yes, definitely. And I would say a member of that board development committee or your diversity champion or your board chair should meet with them.
And I agree wholeheartedly on that, but yes, you have to look at what's going on the moment the person comes on your board, and you're watching for those signs all along. And clearly any board member, and I assume the person may be specifically talking about a person of color, you do it the same with a person of color, and even more so. You want to find out what went wrong, and maybe nothing, maybe just the match wasn't there. And one of the things I always say, and even if there is what we call a failure, I think people get nervous. Oh, okay, I don't want to take any chances with putting this person, a person of color. Oh, what if they fail? I always say to people, everybody has to fail or does not succeed in some point of life, whether you're white or black or brown. Give people a chance to succeed. Try to help them succeed. And if it doesn't work for whatever reason, then you can move on, but make sure there's a positive outcome and an exit interview by the board chair or the diversity champion, as Alice said. Whatever you do, get that person involved and get that person to speak. Or if it's a person of color, may need to speak to that person at some point if you're not getting anything out of the person of color. But think outside the 9 dots and figure out how you're going to get input from that person in whatever way.
Exactly. Okay, next question. And as I sit here listening to the plethora of valuable information on the subject, plethora, sorry, can't read even though I got my glasses on, the term accountability comes to mind. Who is keeping organizations accountable with regards to diversifying the boards?
That's a good question. That's an excellent question. If you have the answer, let me know. Because one of the things
I think it's the CEO and the board chair.
Okay. Short answer, but in the world, I also wish that we had a way of getting the numbers on board, really the physical numbers and so on of how many people are on each board. If we had a state way of looking at it and we could measure how is this board doing versus this board and so on and so forth. That way we would kind of know. We don't always know, but you're right, Alice, it's the CEO and the chair of the board, but it's got to be the community too. If you've got to have your volunteers and your donors. Everybody has to ensure that board is looking at different perspectives and as being diverse, inclusive. But I'd love to do surveys and things like that and so on. But the accountability does have to be within your organization and the community you serve.
Mm-hmm. Should a board assign an existing board member to the new board member? Like a buddy system?
Yeah.
Both Alice and I agree on that.
Yeah, we talked about that. You talk about that in the book and the manual. So,
and we talk about that, as long as it needs to last, and maybe it's only for the first 3 to 6 months, maybe not, and maybe that person doesn't match, and the person gets another buddy. But as long as there's someone that's there to monitor and to answer questions and to help the person feel more comfortable serving on the board. We all agree on the old buddy system.
Okay, great.
I was remembering TO's Trustees of Color. We had a networking meeting over, what's the name of that restaurant? It's now Tonic, but
Deep Blue was the Deep Blue experience.
Deep Blue, that's right. And it was interesting because it was a group of board members who were serving on boards that have been recommended through TOC, and we got together and sat at tables and talked about things. And I think that was tremendous support for those board members to be together and talk about their boards and how comfortable they were. And there was like a group support network. And I think it might be something that we should look at in the community here.
Mm-hmm.
Finding support networks for
as well.
And I am in agreement too. about the buddy or someone, because I think I shared with you and Cynthia and Alice my experience when I was on a board and there was someone on the board who looked like me. She and I did not think we looked at all alike, but other board members thought we did. And it was a little uncomfortable, embarrassing when they would come up to me and talk to me about family members that this other person had in the community, and they had assumed that she was me or I was her. And I didn't have the heart to tell them the first time that, you know, we all don't look alike and I'm not her. But the second time I felt the need to do that. And it came about as a result of what we've been talking about, right? That you put people on the board who kind of look the same and have that same makeup, and then not really talk to them. They're just on the board to fill whatever quota, whatever diversity and inclusion goal. And so I decided on my own to be proactive and really and talk to her about it. And she and I just laughed about it, but and she'd say, well, text me when they're talking about my family. So, you know, sometimes you just have to take the issue very lightly, but also use those issues as teachable moments, right? We've all been there, and where there's the elephant in the room, as we talked about. So I am so glad we're having this conversation. I know we're almost out of time. If there are any other questions, and thanks, Dana. I as a former board member of Dana, I know Dana is amazing and has wonderful tools. It's just, you know, we find the time and or the resources, financial resources to do it, but it's important, right? This topic is not going to go away. As a matter of fact, it's really been a year of diversity, right? And right in our faces. So thank you, Cynthia and Alice and Sheila and Dana. And I'm just honored to be a part of this with you, Cynthia and Alice, and the rest of the attendees here today.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Claudia, Cynthia, and Alice, thank you again for your time. We are running out, and it's unfortunate. We could probably spend more time on this. I myself had a bunch of questions, and I see there's still a couple of questions in the chat room, which we could separately try to answer. One thing that we do request is we have a little survey that we'd ask you to complete to let us know if this type of program is meaningful for you, because we'd love to be able to bring more, but we want to make sure that it's helpful. So JL has put, you'll see there's a SurveyMonkey link in the chat box that you can reference. One thing I think that as I'm listening, and I've had the benefit of being part of some of these conversations in the past, is that it seems like there's a combination of intentionality, patience, and time. And that these things don't get fixed overnight, but the intentionality and the commitment of the board chair and the executive director, the being patient when you don't get it right the first time. You know, the stories that you shared around mishaps that have taken place, and I think that, you know, the continued building of relationships, which we do very well here in Delaware, and is, you know, is very meaningful. So I want to thank all three of you for your time today. I hope that the folks who are listening have gained something from it, and I'm seeing lots of thank yous. So it looks like things went well. Again, I want to thank JP Morgan Chase, who has been such a champion of these efforts, and appreciate all of you and your interest in being part of this conversation. That's the first step. And if you are interested in some resources that Dana can offer, we have resources available, as well as Cynthia mentioned, we have some consultants that we can connect you with. However you're ready to engage, please reach out and we'll do our best to help connect you with the right resource.
Thank you, everybody, again, and have a wonderful rest of the day.